Hey guys, welcome back to another awesome episode of Life Recovery Podcast. I'm Josh. I'm a recovery advocate on the artistic recovery team. That means that I've walked alongside someone that has been in recovery or also have walked through that journey myself. So wanted to welcome you back to this episode today. And today again with us today is Christine Paul. And we're going to be talking with Christine. She is the current director of peer services at 320 Recovery. And she is a certified addiction peer recovery coach, and she holds a degree in psychology. She has worked in the treatment and recovery field for over 5 years, and she brings personal and professional experience. She is passionate about recovery, and she is also ready to help us bridge the gap for those that are seeking recovery today. So we all know that the artistic recovery has podcast episodes like this one here, educational videos as well, and many articles in the online blog. But today we're going to delve a little bit deeper, do something a little bit more into the articles themselves. And Christine is here to talk about them. So before or after listening to this episode today, be sure to check out the articles that we're about to list here today for you. On the Outside Looking In is our first one today, and How to Handle Parenthood in Recovery. You can find them at artisticrecovery.org/read. And so here's our topic for today. We're going to jump into that and go over their topic, which is being on the sidelines of someone that we love as they go into recovery or as they walk through recovery, and watching the pitfalls of addiction. It's difficult. It's discouraging at times, and this episode is going to help us support that person in recovery by utilizing patience and understanding. We're going to talk about healthy boundaries and also delve a little bit deeper into this topic of parenthood. So, specifically as a parent, the struggles and successes that are prevalent in recovery when we ourselves are walking through this journey together. So on the article, On the Outside Looking In, it states that strained relationships aside, and I'll use this in quotes, it can be difficult to simply relate to what someone is going through. And that the first step of this long, difficult journey is to understand addiction at its fundamental level. Christine, we're circling back in. What is the fundamental level, and where do we even start when we want to talk about recovery?
Yeah, so that is a really good question. The first step is just understanding what addiction is. It is really important to understand that it is a chronic and a very complex brain disease. Substances do alter the way that we think, the way we react. It changes a person,
right.
Literally and figuratively.
Right.
So, again, I would just say understanding what you're going up against would be the best place to start.
I mean, that's good. So really, I think today we've prepared a series of questions that we just want to start talking about. And they're all related, of course, to our first article, On the Outside Looking In. So if it's okay, I'm just going to jump in with our second question. And I would like to talk about relapse as a part of recovery. And again, just for those tuning in right now, addiction at its fundamental level is this. And just to recap that, what is at the fundamental level of recovery? Just as we're...
So understanding that it's a chronic and a complex, it's a brain disease.
Right. And we probably don't want to use the term addict or substance abuser.
Yeah, I would definitely encourage, if you are the parent, the loved one, the friend of anybody that is struggling, being mindful of your language is extremely important. There are quite a few studies that have been done that language really does make the difference of someone engaging or not, or seeking out help or not, using the derogatory terms or getting stuck on names versus treating somebody as a person.
As a person, definitely.
Can get in the way of any kind of success. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. We don't want to lose them just
Right.
based on how we title something. That's good. Relapse is a part of recovery. we know it happens. And if someone has relapsed, how do we deal with that and continue to support that person that we love at the same time?
Right. So yeah, relapse is a lot of times a part of recovery. It's not very often that we see people start their journey without a hiccup or two. But as a parent or the loved one, just being aware, paying attention to those details, the behaviors, anything that seems different to you. So I guess it's hard for me to put it into words, but it's, are they staying up too late? Are they isolating, or did they find a new group of friends? Are they still keeping that routine or maintaining what they have already started? Which sometimes for that loved one or parent seems like a full-time job, but as somebody who is in recovery, it is a really vital part. We need that accountability, and we need, we need to know that somebody's looking after us to an extent.
Yeah. Being aware. So, yeah, that right there says a lot. And in terms of, it could be the parent, because we're going to be talking today about parenthood and recovery, but also it's the awareness. And if we're talking about the scale of recovery and awareness, maybe it's kind of flipped. Maybe a lot of parents aren't even realizing that at this point. Maybe we'll get into that about just what are the signs to look for,
right,
as well. Dual diagnoses and co-occurring disorders do play into recovery. And what should we know about that? So specifically...
Yeah. So majority of the time, they go hand in hand. It's not very often we see one without the other. And actually, we do have a statistic that nearly 50% of people that do struggle with substances actually had a pre-diagnosed mental health condition of some sort. But again, once we get to the point that someone is in their addiction, it's hard to define which one came first. It's the old saying, what came first, the chicken or the egg? But we know that they are usually a pair. And even starting that recovery journey, just because you take the substance away doesn't mean that the mental health isn't there. So it's important that, we can identify what the issues are on both ends, and that we're, doing something to help on, both.
Yeah, that's interesting. I suppose if we did find out which came first in that time, we may still be losing that person, whether it is to relapse or the first time that they are using a substance. So dual diagnoses, co-occurring disorders, does that term co-occurring mean that there's this disorder or some behavioral disorder or substance abuse disorder happening while another is happening?
Yeah, they're happening at the same time. So,
So,
and I can just personally, my advice would be to address both at the same time as well. We have so many facilities that actually do the dual diagnosis. So instead of just taking care of one and we'll take care of the other later, try and take care of both of them at the same time, if at all possible, so that, you can get back to that balance and that normal or, just back where you need to be healthy.
Yeah. Healthy is a good word. Yeah. And then someone may define it differently, especially when there's different activities to plug into at a recovery community, or IOP, in terms that are familiar perhaps in the recovery center, like what we're about to talk about next, which is family and relationship and addiction. We don't want to, like we said in the beginning, we don't want to label someone the addict, but when we talk about addiction, how can that affect the entire family or a relationship, a significant relationship? Examples, maybe?
Yeah. I mean, like you said, it can be a big strain on everybody surrounding that individual, emotionally, mentally, physically, sometimes financially. We hear that a lot. Parents say that they don't sleep at night because they're worried about where their child or adult child is, or, Right. It comes in different waves for everybody, but there's I mean, there's no doubt that it affects everybody.
Definitely. So, because then it almost brings up this assumption that the parent themselves is going to need some sort of recovery from this entire process, whether that's a year of that person going through that trial that they're going through, or if that's for the entire duration. The parent's going to need support at that point for that. And maybe there's, in my mind, maybe there's a lacking for the parent to have that support, and it's mostly just all centered on the child, whether adult or actual juvenile child, you know. So
yeah, well, I with saying child, I know commonly we hear that, you know, people start their substance use at a very young age. So I actually hear it more often than not. But yeah, with the family and everything, you know, I hear a lot again. The recovery journey, it's not just the individual. That recovery journey is for the entire family. So it may be me that had the substance issue, but the family dynamics, the communication, I mean, there's a lot of different layers that factor into that. So if that person is, you know, getting healthier and making those changes, you know, it's likely that they're not the only one that needs to adjust a few things. And you know,
that's got to be scary for everyone involved in that whole process.
Yeah.
So how do we begin to assist everyone in the house? So it's a house of 4. Let's say the mom and dad in the picture, and it's the son or daughter that is going through this. We know one person is struggling in the house. How do we begin to assist everyone in the family tree at that point? So, you know, it's that complete mindset of support. So as that ties into your experience working in the recovery center with, you know, 320, what would be a way that you would approach that for everyone in the house specifically?
Yeah. So step 1, and I think that this is one of the most beneficial things that you can do, is to find support for yourself. Find that guidance, whether it's a support group or a friend that's been there, or just, you know, somebody that wants to be supportive and help how they can. But aside from that, inside the household, setting boundaries is, you know, it's kind of like a necessary, you know, there's no getting around it. If you can't set those boundaries, you know, you're not going to see those actions or behaviors change because there are no consequences. There's no, you know, that it's...
Yeah, it's free range.
Yeah.
That's good. So beginning to set up those healthy boundaries, what does that even mean? So that's, you know, healthy boundaries. I think of, okay, am I going to go for my apple, or am I going to go for my, you know, sugary, you know, snack? So, but a healthy boundary in recovery in the house may be something completely different.
Right. And I mean, I think the term boundaries, you know, and setting boundaries, it gets thrown around a lot, like almost to the point where it's just more of a saying, not really an action. But setting boundaries, it can look different. My boundaries and yours might be day and night, or they might be exactly the same. I might set boundaries to protect me mentally, physically, to lower my stress, to keep my morals, you know, protected. But really, that's what it is a protection at the end of the day. And usually it's something that's a benefit to not only the person that's setting the boundary, but for those that are asked to, you know, follow them.
That's, yeah, especially as a parent, then there's this awareness that, you know, my child isn't the one who's setting the boundary. If they're going through recovery, I have to be the one who is taking responsibility for myself and preparing myself for those long nights that we've talked about as well. If we could even go into some practical examples of boundaries and what would be something that we could set up for a parent and their child.
Right. And again, it'll look different in every household. But I mean, setting curfews, you know, financial support, making sure that you're not bailing your loved one out of jail every time, giving them cash, you know, medical appointments, like necessities, food, things like that.
Right.
of course, we don't want our loved ones to go without the things that they need. But again, not giving cash and making sure that there is,
Yeah.
No way that it can be spent or used in any other way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, just simply setting expectations, that in itself is a boundary to,
Yeah. Right. And it's, I expect myself to do when I have this mindset, I think, going into as a parent myself and vice versa, it's, I want to approach this proactively, not just reactively for recovery. Just the way, the world is right now, we realize that it's a possibility for any age when it can start. So that's really good. And I'm sure there's a plethora of books, and of course we have our articles on the website that we can address with this. So that's our main idea today, is that by reading this article that we've talked about, on the outside looking in, we starts with strained relationships, and specifically we're going to talk about being a proactive parent and how that helps us really parent and continue to love our child and ourselves as we're going through recovery. So, when we talk about being a parent in recovery, let's talk about just a toolbox of things that we need to think about. So, what things as a parent in recovery, especially early recovery, what things should we consider? Morning routine. So we got, morning, afternoon, nighttime. Maybe there's routines that have to be thought about. For your own experience, what's been helpful for that?
Right. Well, I mean, I think right off the bat, you said a great one, taking care of yourself. Whether we call it self-care or just, making sure that we are keeping ourselves in a healthy head state. Finding support, again, it is such a tough spot to be in. And the last thing you want to do is go through it alone.
Yeah.
And especially, when you get to that point of having to set those boundaries. I think, anybody that is a parent, we've had those times where we've set that boundary with our kid, and then they've done the puppy dog eyes and begged and pleaded, and we just hate to see our children upset, and we give in. And, for small children, I think that's kind of a normal, sometimes we're gonna be soft. But when you have a child or a loved one that's experiencing an addiction, that consistency and that follow through is, it is in no way, shape, or form in our hands what decisions they make. But us following through and keeping those boundaries, firm, it's a life and death situation anymore.
Yeah.
It's not just, and I don't even mean not just jail or not just this or that, because none of it is a good thing. But with the world today and the drugs and the substances that are being mixed together, it's worse than it's ever been. It's never been a good thing, but there are some big risks involved now.
So worse than it's ever been. I mean, statistically, right now, of course, 320 is in Porter County, Northwest Indiana. Statistically, what's happening right now? I mean, this is 2022, recording in July. So, what's happening right now?
I will say from May of 2020 to April of 2021, there were over 100,000 overdose deaths that were related to opioids. And nationally, and that is a milestone that we have never seen before, and definitely not one that anybody is proud of. But just it's real. The mixtures of, the synthetic opioids, the fentanyl, the carfentanil, and that's what we're starting to see more of in this area. People don't know. It's 10,000 times more potent than morphine, and 100 times more than fentanyl. And the fact that, you don't know what you're getting. You're, it's whether it's prescription pills, if you're getting anything off of the street, there's a really high risk. So I do think it's important for people to stay current on the drug trends and what's going on. And as much as it's not a happy number to report, people need to hear it.
Yeah.
It's real. This is what's happening. And I think we've lost more than enough at this point. So
When's it going to be enough?
Right.
With that as a note for recovery, what are the stages of recovery? So, okay, I'm done with that. I'm done with choosing this. How do I now approach the stages of recovery, and where do I start? So what's my literal first step for me today, making this decision? Finish this episode, I'm done, thrown it out. What do I do next?
Right.
Yeah.
So the 5 stages are pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, and then maintenance. And so when people are going through that, it doesn't always go in order the first time. Sometimes we backpedal, sometimes things go smooth. But that pre-contemplation, that first stage is that, I think something needs to change. Not doing anything about it, not, I'm going to stay right where I'm at, but the thought is there. And then the contemplation, it obviously goes forward from there, and then once we get to our action steps and then our maintenance, and what that maintenance looks like, again, it depends what your recovery path looks like.
Right.
It can be different for everybody, and that's another, we have to stay open-minded to that. Recovery is anything that it is a healthy change, so as defined by that individual who is making the change. So
it's not the coach telling me what to do.
Right. And
I'm choosing. Yeah.
Right. And even as the parent, it may not be exactly what we want, but if it's better than it was, then sometimes, you know what?
Yeah.
It's a step in the right direction.
That's good.
I feel like I got off track on that question, but...
I think that's important because it segues well into how do we set up the healthy parental foundation for this house. So we've talked about the house. We've got one person maybe, and if you do have another child who's going through it at the same time, let's talk about, the one right now. But what is that healthy foundation like for healthy parenting? Recovery related, obviously, but what does that foundation look like? How do we even start that as a parent? Yeah.
Well, I'd even go as far to say as recovery or not, or substance or not, communication. If you can't have those conversations openly, whether they're easy ones or they're the tough ones, that right there is your first roadblock, and it's a pretty big roadblock. As the parent or as the friend, you're the go-to person, and if you can't have that, then of course it makes things difficult.
It would make things difficult. It would possibly prevent a child from even wanting to open up. So it's like, let's have topics about, at the dinner table, let's talk about that. Like, okay, the child doesn't want to open up, but if there's already a preset, channel for them to do that, it's almost like finding a new way to relate with your child, perhaps, or my child, perhaps, that's going to give them those tools to communicate and not feel like they have to hide it from their parents. Right. I know for me growing up, that was the thing where it was like, how do I not talk about this and find ways to get around that? But what good does that do 20 years down the line or, 10 years down the line, right? So it's as a parent realizing that, and there's a lot of different ways to approach parenting, and there's a lot of different books to go about it. But when we're talking about recovery, healthy communication seems to be very important.
Right.
So, with healthy communication, personally, just based on your own experience with it, Christine, how do you find that good balance between leniency and strictness? So, strictness in terms of, let's say the child already is, using, or they are just growing up and they're trying to find attachment and acceptance and then morality as they get older. So how do we find that good balance between strict and lenient as a parent in recovery?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think a big piece is the consistency, and whether it's positive or negative behavior, making sure that we're consistent with setting those boundaries so that it doesn't seem like I'm being soft today and I'm being, over the top the next time. It is a fine line. So I think everybody kind of has to figure out what that good spot is for them. But setting the boundaries that are firm, but still, I think in the article we say the word warm, but they're still realistic. They're not so far-fetched that why would you even set somebody up for failure?
Yeah.
But I mean, I think it's just like goal setting. Set something that is realistic and attainable, and give that the consequences when needed, and then give that praise when it's needed, or just the support for the effort.
Walking alongside them.
All of it.
Yeah.
But but the consistency of it all, I think that's probably one of the best ways to stay in that middle ground.
Yeah. It's interesting talking about goal setting. I almost could see this idea of putting up a piece of paper on the fridge. It's like family check-in times at 2 p.m. on a Friday, and we're just going to start talking and recapping the week, and maybe that's an idea for early childhood development. No solid fact that this actually would be helpful, but we're all finding what works for our families. So, healthy communication, finding what works. And if there's no communication, then nothing's working except no communication.
Right.
So as we're getting ready to wrap up here today, consistently implementing appropriate consequences for behavior. So maybe we've even talked about that already, but as a parent, how do we consistently implement appropriate consequences for the behavior?
Right. Well, and it kind of does come back to the whole, acknowledging the positive and the negative. We hear the word consequence, and it doesn't always mean that it's trouble.
Yeah.
There are positive consequences and negative consequences. So, like I said, acknowledging both, and then that middle ground of giving the support and the praise when the effort is just there. We're not always going to get it on our first try, and I think anybody in the world could relate to that.
Right.
But we sure try a heck of a lot harder when we have somebody cheering us on, or telling us, "Nice try, you can still do it."
Love that. That is good. Yeah. And as a parent, I think we have to tell ourselves that in that process of helping someone who is figuring out the world for the first time. And we talked about that, how a substance can create that mental disorder. And then there's a whole other world that child or adult child is living in once that's introduced. Like the brain development. I mean, I've heard that statistic, but when does the brain actually finally develop? There's a certain age for that. And I think we kind of tie into, if we introduce a substance at age 10, I mean, that's going to really kind of put a halt on that.
Well, don't quote me too hard on this, because I'm going off memory, nothing in front of me, not a doctor, researcher, or anything. But I know girls, their development, or brain development, hits a little bit sooner than men. I want to say men they're fully developed around age 26. And when people start using substances at a young age, that maturing process slows. I don't know if I'd go as far as saying that it stops, but it definitely puts a hinder on that. And, you are still developing, and then you're putting these chemicals or substances in you, and, that you impact a lot more than just having a good time for a night, or, So, and a lot of times we see that too when people start using at a really young age, and say they're in their 30s or 40s, and when they stop, and not to say that they didn't mature or grow older or,
Yeah.
didn't change, but that mentality, is comparable to a much younger version of themselves.
That's interesting.
so-
Yeah, it's interesting because it's like there's a human experience. Let's say there's no substance abuse, just of any kind. But then there's the drug experience where we literally have like shaped ourselves. The child is shaping themselves. The adult has shaped themselves. And so now we're just talking about like proactive things that we can do as parents to approach this with the mindset of, wow, it's not just my son or daughter acting out. There's this whole other chemical makeup that's happening. And, as we get older, as we, develop, there's almost like we have to start at that foundational level again of what it means to be a person.
And I mean, that completely circles back to your very first question, like, where do you start? And that's why you have to start with understanding what you're going up against, or
Right.
you're going to get all the way where you're at now and be
Yeah.
like, what the heck is going on? Whereas if you understand the stages, if you understand what is really happening to the brain, or how difficult it is to change certain things, or how much time it takes to get back to that normal, it will benefit so much, in the long run, just to have that. And really, it gives you a sense of relief because you understand. It's not all these curveballs of like, I didn't see that coming, or
Right.
why is this happening? And like, when you understand, you know what, this is part of the process.
Yeah.
And, let me use my support. Let me set my healthy boundaries. Let me communicate. Let me, to use these different tools. It's really taking care of yourself.
Time-wise, when we're either going through recovery or we're helping our child go through recovery, and let's say all the substances are out of the way, how long does it take to really get that clarity? I've heard that term before, clarity back. And what does that even mean related to how the brain is healing?
Right.
Or the person's
You're throwing me all the
Right.
So it takes around 5 years to get back to that point. And it's going to look different for everybody. And also, the substance you used, if it was A versus B, things impact the brain differently or affect different parts of it. But typically, if you can make it to that 5-year mark, you are homebound, free. And I'm not saying that people don't relapse after 5 years, because that is not true. But your odds of maintaining that recovery are, I want to say 85%. It is extremely high.
5% or 5 years.
Yep, 5 years.
Yeah.
If you can make it to that 5-year mark, which is extremely difficult to do. But of course, it can be done, and
But not doing it alone.
right,
Maintaining that the importance is that we have coaches, we have community,
right,
and
just a connection to anything. Like, whether it's that person, whether it's your community, whether it's an activity, whatever you need it to be, get connected to it, or find somebody that can connect you,
find a blog, get plugged in, like replay that positive, for yourself, whatever that may be.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's amazing how many resources are out there, and I mean, even just national hotlines that you can call, not just for crisis, but just for information, for resources, for somebody to talk to. And sometimes talking to a complete stranger is one of the best things you can do.
Definitely.
But the help is definitely out there. So, I mean, I would encourage people to use those phone lines if you don't know somebody personally, or a location like 320, or, if you don't have that, there's something out there.
There's always something. And someone that's in that role right now, Christine, obviously being a recovery coach and understanding active listening. As we land the plane here right now, what is active listening? and how does that help you in your day-to-day as a recovery coach?
Right. So active listening is like paraphrasing or repeating, in different words what the person shared with you or told you. It does let people know you heard them, and this is what you heard.
Yeah.
I think that it helps clear the communication too, so there's no misinterpretation of anything either if you're repeating it back. But it's your full attention, and then validating what they're saying.
Yeah.
I do hear you, and this is what I heard.
And it's once that person is ready to open up, we're ready to actively listen as a parent, and a lot of information today in a short amount of time. Is there anything else that you wanted to include that you thought would be important for parents, for anyone that's just starting recovery, as it relates to both of our articles here?
Yeah. Well, I definitely would encourage anybody to read the articles that we're referencing. They are excellent. There are tools in there, the different takeaways, the challenges, but even just going to the website and looking at the resources, the phone numbers I'm referencing, SAMHSA, all of that is on there. So if you're one of those people that just doesn't know who to reach out to or what to do first, utilize that.
Definitely. So as a challenge this week, reach out to someone that's on your heart right now that you want to support in their recovery. So the challenge is to help set up healthy boundaries with this person. And this is going to be a challenge that directly relates to our articles here. So with regards to today, our challenge for you, if you're close to them, reach out and find a way today to begin setting up healthy boundaries with this person. You may already have a conversation with them that is happening right now. We're just going to put the brakes on that as we want to support you in that process. And Christine, it's been a pleasure to throw some curves and open up the pathway of communication for what you do on a day-to-day basis, not only in the recovery world, but also as a parent. So thank you for sharing both of those with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And so if you would like more recovery resources like today's, especially if you have kids, please be sure to check out artisticrecovery.org for more podcasts, videos, blogs, and we'll see you guys on the flip side.